Donna Luis, Guerra, Breathe into Life, BIL. What is BIL?
Well, Breathe into Life, also known as BIL, is a community of people that support one another to stay in a positive mindset. We are supporting our friends, our loved ones, our network, our community, everybody that wants to be a part of this revolution of staying positive.
Well, how do we get there? Let's talk about that for a second. How do we get to this place of positivity?
Right.
Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Please.
As long as I can remember, going all the way back to my very early years in my childhood, which was mostly in Vietnam. So I was raised by my grandparents, and everything around our childhood was about supportive. My grandparents were very supportive of us kids. They always wanted to make sure that we had enough food, we have, the right education, and that we, were involved in some kind of music. Vietnam became a communist country a little bit after I was born. So I think because of the war, because of all the endurance and all of the loss that we've had from the war, we were put in a position that in order to survive, you must stay positive. You must have faith that everything is going to work out. I think that has always been the mindset ever since I was very young. I think that's where I started to kind of understand what it takes to keep going, is to stay positive that everything is going to be all right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What about you?
I had a very different upbringing. That's really interesting. So around the same, I was born a few months after you, right? Mm-hmm. And so we talked, you're from Vietnam, and my dad was in Vietnam. He was drafted to Vietnam. And so I grew up in a place where there wasn't a lot of parenting. There wasn't a lot of role modeling. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a lot of inspiration. There wasn't a lot of so I didn't grow up with this, everything's going to be okay. And I don't know why. I just grew up sort of fight or flight, a little bit of stress, and I just remember a lot of stress, as I got older. My mom left when I was very little, and there was no one to talk to about that and to process with that. And my older siblings, it's they were kids, right? So it's not really, that's not their responsibility. So it wasn't until much later in life did I start to realize how powerful that is, and how powerful thinking positively is, and how powerful it is just to be, it's not just optimism, it's really just being able to reconstruct or take your negative thinking and turn that positive, because your brain is so powerful.
Can I ask you, when you were little and you didn't have any adults around, and you knew you had to do things on your own, how did you get there? How did you get to school? How did you get to believe that, you have to continue in school and you have to do certain things? What was that like?
Well,
when there was no one around to kind of
Well, I think that's where I have an older brother by 2 years, and I remember going to school with him. And I remember my oldest sister left when she was young, So it's really there were three of us, and we just had a routine. And I'm sure my dad was around enough to be no, you got to go to school. There was no we weren't vagabonds, and just or homeless. It's we always had a roof over our head. We always had food to eat. We always had clothes, but nobody really explained the importance of that, right? So, and I'm not saying that I wasn't looking for that, but I didn't grow up realizing how amazing that was. So by going to school every day, it was just a routine. It was sort of that's just what we did. But it was really after school, you were kind of left to your own devices. There was no one checking homework, and that I remember, or tests, or there was none of that. And so it was very much you're left to your own devices. How did I stay on that path? I'm not 100% sure.
I think,
I don't know.
okay.
Maybe I saw that. I don't know. Maybe I saw cousins.
I believe that a positive mindset. I believe that a positive mindset comes from a convicted faith, having certain amount of faith that everything is going to be okay. I believe that is where it stems from, is having faith. And at the moment when you're a child, you don't know that it's faith. You just know that you have this belief that everything is going to be all right, right? So I think if I have to look way back, I mean, as far as I can remember, like being a child, I just remember always having this faith that no matter what, everything is going to be all right. Although I didn't have parents around, my mother passed when I was very young. I was 4 years old. And my dad then didn't know how to take care of us. So he, handed us off to our grandparents. And so we ended up living with our grandparents in Da Nang with my brother and I. And, he's only 11 months younger. So we were both very little. And I don't remember much of like those early years living with my grandparents, but I do remember at like maybe from the age of like 7 to 8, and on. So when I look back at those years, I mean, yes, we were left to our own devices a lot as well, because we didn't have adults always like looking over on us going, you have to do this and you have to do that. But I do remember there were a certain amount of direction and guidance, like from my aunts and my grandparents. Like there were routines and there were guidelines and they were like, you must do this and you cannot do this. So there were some parameters, right? But because we didn't have a lot of Vietnam and because the war left us very poor, there was never any certainty what's going to happen to you. Right. So it's kind of like a similar story where you had uncertainties of like, where am I going? What am I doing? You're not sure. So I kind of I had the similar experience.
I think it's definitely similar. I think part of it is like, I didn't grow up like I wasn't devastated by war. I wasn't impoverished. I wasn't the people I saw around me were successful in the sense that like they were societally speaking, they were succeeding, they were doing what they had to do by society standards. And I'm talking about like not drinking or doing drugs or any of that. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying like they would show up if they had a job or they had to go to school, they would just show up and they did that. And so that somehow transferred to me. And I always felt like that was very much, I'm the product of that culture, of that, because if I had grown up in a place that was impoverished and people weren't necessarily showing up and doing that and they were beating on each other and they were beating on their wives or whatever, they were shooting up or they were doing like really awful things, the outcome would have most likely, it would have been very different. The outcome would have been different. So this is where I feel like everybody has a purpose. Like every human has a purpose. It's just like we've spoken about this. We've talked about this numerous times. It's just like, you're like finding that, but you can't if you're distorting that with, rumination and negativity and bias and cultural bias. And you're like, oh, blah, 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 always happens for victimization or blame. Like you can't.
So in your childhood, do you feel like you had some of that? Like rumination and
yes,
and
absolutely.
labeling and
anxiety for sure,
and anxiety.
Absolutely.
Okay,
stress.
How long do you think like that went on for? From what age to what age?
From probably 1.5 till in my 40s.
1.5, like
because that's when my mom split. I think it was around there, 1.5, 2.
So you
I
feel
didn't
like
remember
you,
that.
I've always lived with anxiety.
I didn't realize that
I see.
until I started like doing therapy, right, for myself, because I could do it in my 30s, and I started to like come to terms with that, but not really.
So
It's really my
focus
deeper
on
my
your
40s.
like your childhood. Like
Sure.
let's talk about what your upbringing was like, because I feel it's very important to like reflect back on our childhood, because those are the years that are very impressionable and they lead us into our 20s or 30s, right? So our 20s and 30s, like we kind of float through. I feel like we just kind of like did what we felt like was the thing to do.
Absolutely.
It wasn't until in our 40s we were becoming like, okay, I can make my own decisions, and
That's great.
my decisions are effective, and they're, and they affect other people. And so I think we should, let's share more. I want to know more about what was like you in your teenage years.
Well, I think very early on, it's sort of like you're releasing dopamine, and you were looking for ways to feel good, because when I felt stressed, it was more reactive. So we're not trying to react. I'm not trying to react, right? Like everything, I'm trying to respond, right? But back then, I didn't have any coping mechanism. So it was like, well, when can I have more candy or more sweets, like something, or more bad food, like something that's going to release that hit of whatever dopamine or in my brain. And I think by the time then very early on, I started finding like ways to do other things, including drinking, having sex, and smoking, and doing drugs, right? And I was like 12.
Yeah.
So that didn't really, and nobody like, hey man, wake up. Nobody like was there. And I'm not putting that on anybody's responsibility. I'm just saying like, no one said like, hey, that's, not responsible behavior. I just did it. And it was really because I was a pleasure seeker, right? I was just, and that was my tweens all into, really until I got married,
I think yes, I think that there are probably a lot more of that going on in society that's not spoken about, because when, and this is exactly what I feel like is really important, is like when kids are left to do whatever they want without discipline and without kind of some guidance, they're going to do whatever that feels good, and they're going to reach for alcohol, drugs, sex, whatever that is, like the easiest thing to reach for. So my upbringing was a little bit different. So I came here to the States. So after living with my parents, and my dad left after living with my grandparents until I was 12, I then moved to the States. And my dad was already here. He had left Vietnam early on after he handed me off to my grandparents. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't want to leave like my, safety net. I don't want to leave my like village of like uncles and aunts and cousins and grandparents whom like give me endless love, right? And safety and guidance to go into a very uncertain, unknown territory, and America at the time sounded like huge, and there was, a lot of things I didn't know about people, about culture, about, what to expect. So coming here in my teenage years, it was very lonely. It was like, it wasn't ideal for a teenager. So because like what we just talked about, right? Teenage years require that you get guidance, you have support, you have safety.
Right.
And if we didn't have that, like obviously we're going to just do whatever that feels good.
Right.
So yeah, and my dad finally like got us into, like school, and we were, everything was fine until he left when I was 16. He decided to leave America to go back to Vietnam to start his own IT company. So at 16, I was left to take care of my brother and myself until now. I think that's probably when I realized that fear is very pronounced, and I remember being really afraid of everything.
Because you came here as a teenager, that was like your identity, right? You're finding your identity, and there's a lot of marketing because the States is known for that, right? We're marketing to do all the time, and there's a lot of comparison here. And I know that I was comparing myself to my older brother, to my older siblings, but then you have marketing, then you have cultural comparison. So what was that like for you, just to like show up? Because it sounds like back in Vietnam, people they loved you. And there was a lot of love, and there was a lot of support, and there was just a lot of acceptance. And then you go to a place it's kind of cold, right? It's kind of distant, and in this sense, bonds, like you don't have that support group. So what was that like?
No, it was very lonely. I remember thinking like, this is wild, like nobody is ever home, and I was always surrounded with a lot of people, but neighbors, friends, relatives, uncles, aunts, grandparents. And I remember thinking like, I don't fit in at all. Like I didn't speak any English. I only knew 2 words, and I looked different, and so it was very confusing for the first year. I was 12 going on 13. And then mind you, like, as a teenage girl, right? Like you also, like your body's changing, and like the fashion here is different. And, like there's certain like, undergarments that you have to wear. And to be honest, like I didn't have like the top undergarment because we didn't need it. But anyway, so with that observation, I remember thinking to myself, the only way that I am going to be able to catch up and to blend in and to fit in is to, 1, very quickly learn English, and then 2, to just adapt. Like I didn't know what that meant, but I just knew I had to blend in and adapt to this new environment.
Right.
And so that was the goal. I quickly learned, turn on the TV. I started listening to what they were saying. I started translating what they meant. I asked a bunch of questions to my cousin who was like, teaching us English at the time in the elementary school that we went to. And I was a sponge, I wanted to learn so quickly because I didn't want to be this odd person, like awkwardly going into school every day. So I believe that is where the determination to like, everything is going to be all right if you keep doing what what you're intending to do. If you have goals, you just keep getting at it. Right. So yeah, sure enough, by the time I was 13 and a half, I was fluent in English. And I remember my dad said, you have to be around people that speak English. You cannot hang out with Vietnamese people because otherwise we would not be able to like, practice and adapt quickly.
Right.
So yeah, that was a really great advice, and it was a great tool because I started speaking English even with my brother at home. We were just left always to ourselves.
Yeah.
So we would just only communicate in English in practice and in hope that we would just blend in. That was the mission, was to blend in. And by the time I was 14, I blended in very nicely. Like I had my own style. I had, my English was fluent, and I started high school in a new city. So yeah, I think, one, just having a convicted faith that everything is going to work out, and having certain amount of, ambition on like getting those goals achieved.
Yeah,
is everything.
That's interesting. I didn't have that, but I had music, and music was so powerful. And I found that in my teenage years, and it was just such a powerful like calling.
Okay, so you were left to do whatever you would like in your teenage years, and you were reaching for alcohol, you were reaching for just like anything that made you feel good, and then you realize that this is not going to be sustainable, right? And
and all I can say, and looking back on that, that's the first realization that there is a higher power. There's something greater than all of us, right? To me, that's what and I'm not trying to say like, oh, Jesus or Allah or Brahma. I'm not trying to like define it. It's just that's when I look back on my life, that pulled me so hard. It's like, no, you got to do this. And I could hyper focus. I was a very like intense, hyper focusing person. Like I just had that, whatever it is about me. Right. So rather than do damage to myself, I just fed my brain with music. And that was one thing that my dad was very, he was very determined about, was that we were all going to learn a musical instrument early on. Right.
Yeah, he knew.
And he knew. Right. And I did, and I started to learn how to read. I didn't learn just one instrument. I learned multiple. And I just did. I just have one of those brains that just like, and so very early on, I was introduced to it. And when I had the time to like focus and to like really use music as a way to like, okay, society's doing this, family, I don't even know what's going on over there, friends, whatever, but there's music, and that was bigger than me, and that sucked me in. And that's when I just gave into that, and I knew like a lot was going to be okay. I knew like I was going to pay bills, and like, because I started to see like you could work, like quote unquote, like you could do gigs and you could make money, and I didn't really have, there was part of my family that was just like, whatever, Luis, just wrote me off, like, you're an artist, bohemian guy. But there was another part that was like, cool, that's it. You just like do what you believe in or you love, your passion, and just keep doing it. And it was music for me at that time,
Do you feel like music saved you, or do you feel like once you found music, you had this faith that if you lean into that and that you can, that you continue to like use that as a, I don't know, like to kind of like put your energy towards, rather than like the drugs, alcohol, and the bad things that you were consuming. Do you feel like that kind of gave you faith and saved you anyway?
Faith in what?
And just like faith in like, this is going to lead me somewhere, this is going to...
Not really. I think it was more of a distraction from all the bad stuff that I was doing, this was really positive, and I wasn't thinking so much about, it's not that I stopped doing bad stuff, it's that I was like really in this scene. I was starting to be like in the industry, I was starting to see it. I didn't think so much, I wasn't ambitious like that. Like I was very much artistic, and creative and bohemian, in the sense of just like, that's who I surrounded myself with, and so there wasn't a lot of like ambition. I didn't want to be the next Rick Rubin, in the world of production. That wasn't the goal. It was more about fascination and learning, how deep could I take this? That's what led me to learning about arranging, and then like orchestration, eventually into composition, and eventually into scoring, But that's over years, so it definitely rewarded me. And I was used to that sort of like reward, like that. It definitely was releasing dopamine. I was definitely like, I was, for like a better way to explain it, I was getting high from that. I was getting off from that, from music, right? And I think a lot of creative people do. Right, from their passion, their art or sculpting or whatever it is, dancing, it's like but it's like you tap into the zone. And the instrument I had chosen, I didn't realize till much later in my life, was actually like resonating with my heart and my heart chakra, right? And not to get like too new agey, but it's like there is an alignment that I feel. And so that was happening simultaneously just by coincidence, but there is no coincidence. It's like the universe is sort of like bringing you,
Yeah.
bringing you on. What do you want, right? And I think that's been a little bit of a challenge for me to resolve that.
So, okay, so what it sounds like is that like music didn't save you. You used music as another outlet of to feel good. Right?
Oh, great. Yeah.
So you basically obsessed over music to again like to release dopamine and to like really get the high from that. But that's the better, healthier way of getting high, which is like playing music and feeling music and hearing music.
Exactly.
Because I want to you basically like highlight that, because I feel it's really important that right now, with all the talents in the world and all the musicians and all the artists and all the creative, and I think that everybody is creative.
Yes,
I'm not, including the accountants of the world and the lawyers, because everybody has the ability to creatively either solve something, create something from nothing, or like, beautifully create music, sounds, and
I agree.
Art, and so, etc. My point is that like I want you to share based on your experience, like what would you say to your younger self around that time when you're like, I'm just using music as just another high outlet, or like to get more dopamine in my body. What would you say now as an adult to your younger self around that time? How could you guide him, or what would you say to him to get him into a safer place, a more creative outlet where he can expand rather than like not consciously knowing what he's doing?
I would have, great question, by the way. I would have redirected the energy into what exactly Breathing Life is doing, and that is that like, it's very positive, right? Music is positive. It's okay, cool, you can succeed and be ambitious, and that's all great, and I could plant that seed to my younger self. Mm-hmm. But it's really about there is no substitute for positive thinking about everything so that you can flourish. And the clearer you are, the cleaner you are, the more sober you are, the better you're going to sound and play music, and you're going to focus even more so. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's a distraction, and yes, there are ways to like sort of like escape, but it really is one of those things. It's like how it's so deep, right? It's how deep is the ocean. It just keeps going. Like there's just more layers of music, and you can learn more. And I really wish I could tell my younger self to not compare, and it's okay. You're going to fail. Like there is no failure. You're going to learn, right? There is no, but like there's going to be somebody better than you, right? This isn't a comparison of ego, right? And that's okay,
right?
And really spin it positively. Like, what a gift! How grateful am I for having that in my life? What a gift!
Yeah,
to be, and then like decades of doing music. Yeah, it's like what a gift. And so if my younger self could only know how powerful that is, that's what I would share with that person.
Like you said earlier, like perfect timing for everything that's happening in our lives, right? So I feel like because of what happened,
that's right.
What you did during your young years is what led you to where you are today. So that's why BIL is born, and this is why we're sitting here talking about it. So I am always curious, because I ask myself that all the time. Knowing what I know right now, what would I tell my younger self? Because similarly, like your story, I did spend a lot of years in my teenage years. So I did really well in high school. I did, I graduated with like high honors, and I was ready to go to college, but I didn't. I drove up to Cal Poly Pomona on my first day, as a computer science major, and I couldn't find a parking space, so I left because I didn't want. I knew in my heart, like, that's not my major. I'm not a computer science major person. Right. I just knew that. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew it had to be something that that I really love, right? So that was like the first signal in my brain, like, do what you love and time can wait. So I truly believe that. I truly believe timing is everything. So I pulled out from the parking lot. I left. And I went home, and I knew I just couldn't just sit around and do nothing. So I went to work. I went and got like 2-3 jobs just to make the bills, to pay the bills. So a lot of extra time I spent smoking, drinking, going out to clubs,
escaping, right?
Yeah, experimenting on different types of drugs to see, like how great I can feel. And looking back, if let's say I have to like tap into my younger self, as she's doing this, because I felt like it was very reckless, like it was definitely reckless because I didn't have adults around to say, don't do that. It's very dangerous.
Right.
I didn't have like, I didn't have a direction in my future. I just knew all I had to do was to work, show up at my job, get the paycheck, pay the rent, pay the bills, and then just keep doing that. And you'll be fine. That's all I knew is like, if I keep doing that, I will be fine. But I wasn't fine. Every time I went to drink, I felt worse. Every time I did more drugs, I felt more horrible. Life wasn't fine. I was sad. I was depressed, And so what I'm trying to say is that like all of those events was to lead me to realizing that like if you want more to this, you're going to have to figure out how to get out of this.
That's right.
Get more.
Yes.
Or to go and try something different.
Yeah.
So I did just that. I basically stopped doing drugs like cold turkey. I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore because I look awful. I don't feel so good. And this can't be sustainable. Like I'm not going to live a very long time if I continue. I just don't know how it came so clearly, but it did, right? I was like 25. And
interesting. That's when you stopped doing drugs? Sorry, we're pivoting into, I'm curious about this, like cleaning up your act and sobriety. So going back to that, that's when you stopped using drugs in your 20s?
Yes. So I would say like around 24, 25. And I remember, I remember very clearly the last time I did drugs. I looked awful. My eyes were like, I had major bags under my eyes. I hadn't slept for days, and I was drinking to get to sleep, which was like the worst thing you can do.
Right.
And I remember my friend showing up, and he's like, you look awful. And I remember thinking like, I don't want to look awful. I don't want to feel awful.
Right.
And I knew that was the thing that was making me feel awful. So guess what? Like, if the thing is making you feel awful,
then
that's the thing that you got to get rid of to not feel awful. I felt like it was such an easy calculation and answer that I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw away the drugs and not do the thing that is making me feel awful.
Yes.
I made a decision to stop doing what was making me feel bad. And so I went on. But not to say I didn't stop alcohol at that time.
But still, you stopped doing drugs because you were like, you were feeling really bad. And see, I think we fool ourselves, right? And this is my experience. Like, we fool ourselves into feeling good for a moment. Like, I didn't realize, for example, like back to music, like I didn't realize until much later in my life how afraid, like I had stage fright. I was afraid to go on a stage. But if you give me enough booze and enough drugs or whatever, or enough booze, I'm fine. I'm confident. Stage is awesome. I'll go. Let's go. And so I think we fool ourselves, and that is this sort of false empowerment, and it can happen from a lot of an assortment of things, not just like drugs and alcohol, but I think those are just symptoms.
Yeah.
And those are just like, they click with me, and maybe the generation, but it could be like a lot of things,
I think a lot of people can relate to that. I can definitely relate to that because, as a young, late tweens and, 20-year-old, like I was very insecure,
Right.
And the image at the time was that you have, and it probably is still, is that you have to be very thin
Right.
to be attractive.
Right.
At least that was how I perceived life, right? I was seeing models and, people that were thin, really thin, being the attractive ones. So I was chasing after that. So the drugs kind of like made me not eat. And so I was getting very thin, so I got thin, but my health was hayfucked from all the not sleeping and not eating. So I was actually destroying my life, right? So I want to, I really want like those people, I want to share this event, like the way we felt as when we were younger, to people that are going through that as young adults,
Right.
feeling insecure, feeling like they have to match up to whatever they're seeing on TV. Seeing
on TV,
phone, they're on social medias and
absolutely.
films and music videos and because especially the world of AI, everything looks very perfect.
It looks amazing.
And our human beings, we have shapes, we have curves, we have
That's right.
skin flaws, we have, but we're perfect the way we are, because as long as we know that we feel good and we show up in life, then, we are going to be beautiful. We are beautiful.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm going to bring it back to Breathing the Life for a second, because Breathing the Life is about our community supporting one another to think positively, right? Have a positive mindset. And I want to explain that. Some of us didn't know about what a positive mindset is at all, right? Like you're just like, I have a mind. You don't realize that your mindset is secondary, because it's maybe if you're in a fight or flight situation, then it's like it's just happening as a reflex. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like all of this, there's no judgment on anything, because nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
We are not created by AI, right? We're humans, and it's the experience. And I'm just like, I'm grateful to be here talking to you, launching a podcast. This has been a dream for a long time. But to get to this place, it's like, there's no perfection in any of it. It's like you have to go through it to understand. And I think what this conversation, hopefully like a lot of our conversations on this show, will be to help people, young, old, whatever age, to realize it's like, yes, you're not alone.